Welcome friends to the Secret Doctrine webinar. This is our fourth class in the series, and today we are going to start exploring stanza 2. Before we do that, I wanted to share with you a summary that Blavatsky wrote in the Secret Doctrine of the stanzas. We can read the summary for the stanza 1 to remember what we have been exploring, and then the summary for the stanza 2, so that we can have a sense of what is coming. So she says, the first stanza describes the state of the one all during pralaya, before the first flutter of reawakening manifestation. So this is what we have seen in our previous classes. She says, a moment's thought shows that such a state can only be symbolized. To describe it is impossible. Nor can it be symbolized except in negatives, for since it is the state of absoluteness per se, it can possess none of those specific attributes which serve us to describe objects in positive terms. And we have seen that this was not, that was not. Hence, that state can only be suggested by the negatives of all those most abstract attributes which men feel rather than conceive. We saw that the attributes that were talked about were space, time, mind or intelligence, etc. So these are the attributes which we can feel rather than conceive as the remotest limits attainable by the power of our conception. So that is a summary of the first stanza that we have explored in the last two classes. Now regarding the second, she says, the stage described in stanza 2 is to a Western mind so nearly identical with that mentioned in the first stanza that to express the idea of its difference would require a treatise in itself. Hence, it must be left to the intuition and the higher faculties of the reader to grasp, as far as he can, the meaning of the allegorical phrases used. So this second stanza, as she says, is quite similar and yet different from the previous stanza. Manifestation begins with the next stanza that we will explore in our next class. But in this stanza, there is the transition between the night of the universe and the day of the universe. So, to a certain extent, it is like the transition from a person that is sleeping and the person that is awakening before that person begins to move. So, there is a change in the mind from the state of unconsciousness, let's say, to coming into consciousness before that consciousness translates itself in moving the body, for example. So what this stanza is describing is that change. There is no really any objective change. There is a change in the most subjective aspect of the universe. This is why when Blavatsky chose a title for this stanza, she chose the idea of differentiation. Differentiation is not even there, but now there is the idea. Differentiation will soon come after this idea of differentiation begins. So she says this is difficult to grasp and has to be that only our intuition can bring a certain sense of the difference. And then she says the stanzas, or indeed it must be remembered that all these stanzas appeal to the inner faculties rather than to the ordinary comprehension of the physical brain. So this is important to keep in mind because, as we have mentioned, the aim of these stanzas is not to give a philosophy, it is to present certain ideas that may awaken a faculty in our minds that is very rarely stimulated. So when studying the Secret Doctrine, we can take this as a spiritual practice to put our mind on things that are rarely offered to us in our daily life. So now with this introduction or this summary, we can start with the second stanza. So as I said, the title that Blavatsky chose is The Idea of Differentiation. And the first shloka says, "Where were the builders, the luminous sons of Manvantaric dawn?" You see, now there is a mention of the Manvantaric dawn, of the day of the universe that is about to start. "They were in the unknown darkness of their Ahi Parinishpana." So Ahi, remember we talked about this as being the highest beings to differentiate in the universe. In this case, the Ahi is used as an adjective. So they are angelic Parinishpana. If you are not, familiar with the word Chohan, which means Lord, or the Dhyani Buddha, which is one of these Ahis, the highest beings. So where were the builders of the universe? And see that it says luminous in contradistinction with the darkness that the previous stanza was talking about. Now there is the idea of the light, the luminous sons of Manvantaric dawn, the ones that are going to be manifested. But they still are in the darkness. So you will see in this stanza that there is a frequent referring to opposites: darkness and light, form, no form, sound, silence. You will see, because this is when the idea of these differences begin to appear. So the luminous suns are in the unknown darkness of their Ahi Parinishpana. The producers of form, these are the producers of form from no form. You see another duality here. The root of the world, the Devamatri and Swabhavat, rested in the bliss of non-being. So we will see how Blavatsky explains these different terms. First, the builders, the luminous sons of the Manvantaric dawn. These builders are the real creators of the universe, she says. And in this doctrine, which deals only with our planetary system, they, as are the architects of the ladder of the planetary system, are also called the watchers of the seven spheres, which exoterically are the seven planets, and esoterically the seven earths or spheres, that is planets, of our chain also. So she says although the first stanza can be applied to the whole universe, to when the whole universe is in a state of night, of pralaya, as the stanzas progress, they describe more specifically what happens within our solar system, and even more specifically what happens on our Earth. So as we go on with the stanzas, then what they describe becomes more and more specific. She says that these builders are the builders of the solar system, with its seven planets, the seven sacred planets of the ancients. Blavatsky says this was it was not because they didn't know about more planets than seven, but she says there are seven planets that have a special role within the solar system, and these were the seven planets in the ancient wisdom. Now she says exoterically it means the seven planets, but esoterically it can also refer to the chain of globes that is associated to our Earth. We already saw in a previous class this diagram, the idea in Theosophy, and we are not going to go into that right now because this is too early within the universal processes. But the idea in Theosophy is that our Earth, the visible Earth, is part of a wider cycle of evolution or scheme of evolution that involves other globes like these ones that are just with letters C and E, B and F, A and G. Now these words or globes are not physical. Blavatsky explains these are on different planes of perception. So when evolution finishes on this earth, it will go on to the inner planes, and there will be some kind of evolution, but non-physical there. And this evolution goes on in several rounds. So we come back to physical earth several times. So she says that these luminous suns of the Manvantaric dawn refer to the actual creators of the solar system, or when applied to our planet, of the planetary chain of which our Earth is part. So where were they? In the unknown darkness, in their Ahi, Johanic or Dhyani-Buddhic, Parinishpana. So she says, Parinishpana, remember, is the summum bonum of the Absolute, hence the same as Parinirvana. We have already discussed all this. Besides being the final state, it is that condition of subjectivity. So when she uses subjective, normally she refers or uses that term to refer to non-physical. So it's that condition of subjectivity which has no relation to anything but the one absolute truth, Paramartha Satya, on its plane. You know, when we are related to something, that means that we are separate from that something. So there is a duality there. When the states of unity are described, many times are said that they are, the state of unity is not related or is not in relation to separation, because nothing is outside of this unity. So she says that in this state of Parinishpana, there is only a being, the absolute truth. The absolute truth that in Buddhism many times is called Paramartha Satya. It's this state of unity in which there is no relation with anything in the sense of being separate of. So she says it is that state which leads one to appreciate correctly the full meaning of non-being, which, as explained, is absolute being. So it is only in this state of Paramartha Satya, or this absolute truth, that we can really understand how the non-being is absolute being. Without being in that state, we just speculate, we can use some metaphors, allegories to try to have a concept of it. As we said, we can perceive certain reflections of this in our own life, in meditation, because that non-being is the background of everything on any plane. So we can access that non-being on any plane, but of course the higher in the planes we are aware of, the closer to the pure non-being we are. Now Blavatsky says sooner or later, all that now seemingly exists will be in reality and actually in the state of Parinishpana. But there is a great difference between conscious and unconscious being. Remember, Parinishpana is this absolute being, or absolute in a relative sense, as she said, is the purest being that is possible to be attained or to be realized in this particular cycle of evolution. Now, she says there is a difference between conscious and unconscious being. The condition of Parinishpana, without Paramartha, which is this self-consciousness, she says self-analyzing consciousness, and in Sanskrit there is a term Swasamvedana. So the condition of Parinishpana without self-consciousness is no bliss, but simply extinction, is annihilation, and she says for 7 eternities, for the remaining, or for how long the pralaya lasts. Now this is an important point that explains what the purpose of evolution is. So there is a monad that before the manifestation of the universe is merged in this absoluteness, in this state of perfection. Now that monad may, if it has not developed a certain self-consciousness in the previous evolutionary cycle, it will be unaware of that absolute being. When going through the whole evolutionary cycle, then and coming back to the state of Parinishpana or Parinirvana, these are synonyms. When coming to this state, if that monad has successfully gone through all the process of evolution, then that monad will be aware of this state of absolute being. Blavatsky says there is a difference, for example, to a ball of iron that is that is under the sun. That ball gets warm. That means that the ball is responding to the sun, chemically speaking. There is a response to the sun, but the ball doesn't know that it's warm. So she says a human being that develops self-consciousness under the sun gets warm, and he knows that he's warm. So the idea is that after the process of evolution, after monads go through the human kingdom, it is in the human kingdom where this self-awareness is developed, and then those monads that have accomplished that goal in parinirvana, they will be aware in this state of non-duality, this conscious non-consciousness that we talked about. But it is a kind of awareness. It's an awareness of absolute being. But those monads that have not reached that state, they will also be in Parinishpana. They will be in the state of absolute perfection, but they will not be aware of it. So that is the difference between a monad before and after it goes through the whole process of evolution. Now, these builders are the producers of form, rupa in Sanskrit, from no form, arupa. In the idea in the esoteric philosophy is that all forms are made out of this homogeneous unity that has no particular form, and these forms come into place by means of intelligence. We saw that this intelligence is spread in the universe, is in the very fabric of the universe, and when beings, the highest beings, differentiate, they become the vehicle for this universal intelligence, and it is through these beings that the world is shaped. But this is not a creation out of nothing. As we have seen, space with its ever invisible vestures, which are the root of matter, the root substance, it is eternal. So there is always space and its other aspect that is substance. When intelligence becomes active again, and this being differentiate, they begin to shape that homogeneous substance, which in Greek they used to call chaos because it has no form, no structure. So they shape this into the forms first on the spiritual planes and then lower and lower until we come to the physical plane. So also there is a mention to the root of the world, the Deva Matri and Swabhavat, which rested in the bliss of non-being. So Deva Matri is the idea of the mother of the gods in Hinduism. And this Deva Matri is Aditi, which is another name for cosmic space. So remember that in the first stanza we talked about the eternal parent wrapped in her ever invisible vestures. So there is the idea in the esoteric philosophy, as we pointed out, that the feminine, if we have to put any gender to the first thing we can conceive, it will be feminine. So the Deva Matri, the mother of the gods, which is the space, this space that is filled with the presence, and that its other aspect is these vestures. This space was still in a state of non-being. So that's the first shloka here. Now the second says, where was silence? And then there is another question. Where were the ears to sense it? No, there was neither silence nor sound. You see again here a duality, sound and silence. So the first stanza is mostly about unity by denying things. In the second stanza, we begin to see a duality that is not yet. So the second stanza could be said to be a not yet. It's about to happen, but not yet. So where is the silence? Where are the ears to sense it? No, there was neither silence nor sound. Not save ceaseless eternal breath, motion, which knows itself not. So Blavatsky says the idea that things can cease to exist and still be is a fundamental one in Eastern psychology. So even though an existence is not manifested, there is a being even when not manifested. And Blavatsky says under this apparent contradiction in terms, in the idea of not to exist and yet to be, there rests a fact of nature to realize which, rather than to argue about words, is the important thing. And this is important in us because existence would be, in our psychological experience, existing would be to be aware with thoughts, emotions, actions. I exist, this is what I am. Now, what happens when there are no thoughts, when there are no emotions, when there are no actions? Many people think that we are not there. If there are no thoughts, no emotions, no actions, then we are not there. We are just unconscious, or we died, or we disappeared. Because they can only conceive being as far as existing with these particular qualities. This happened even with Descartes, the famous philosopher that said, I think, therefore I am. He was trying to look into a proof that he existed. And he came to the point that he said, well, I exist because I am thinking. Now, if he had gone further than that, if he had been able to stay in pure silence, he would have realized that he existed even when there was no thought, even when there was nothing else. So if anything, he should have said, I am, therefore I exist. So this state of being that is beyond existing in one particular way or the other is very important. And it's essential in the spiritual life that we begin to be more and more in touch with this pure being that is just being, not doing, not acting or thinking or feeling. But as Blavatsky says, what is important is not to argue about this, but to try to realize this fact. And then she says a similar paradox is offered by chemical combination. Do hydrogen and oxygen cease to exist when they combine to form water? So don't think of the atoms, for this analogy to work. Think you have two gases, and their being is, to be these gases, hydrogen and oxygen. Then when you mix them together, you have a liquid. So you say, where are they? Were they annihilated? Now they are something different, something that seems more real. The water seems more real to us than the gases. Have they been annihilated? And they have not. They have entered into a different existence in which they became something different, and yet they are still there. To a certain extent, this state of unity in pralaya is a real state of unity where the one being is something different from what all the different fragments will be when they are expressed. And yet all these different fragments, which are the monads, are still there within the one being, not separate. If you think of hydrogen and oxygen as atoms, we normally think, well, the water has a different, form than the gases, but the atoms are still intact inside. So don't go to that level of the analogy. Just think of the gases becoming liquid, and then that liquid can be reversed back to the gases. So this unity is a real unity where there is no separation. It's not just a collection of things. It's one thing, but somehow that unity can be broken back in the old monads that were in the previous universe. So this is why there is no annihilation, even though there is a true unity. And this, of course, is difficult to grasp mentally. So Blavatsky says that this, for the oxygen and hydrogen as gases, the water is a state of non-being, which is more real being than their existence as gases, allegorically speaking. And it may faintly symbolize the condition of the universe when it goes to sleep or ceases to be during the nights of Brahma, to awaken or reappear again when the dawn of the new Manvantara recalls it to what we call existence. So that's more or less what we have been talking about. So then the other part, nothing existed, not save ceaseless eternal breath, which is motion. And this we are just going to read because we already talked about the great breath and the absolute abstract motion. So she repeats here, the breath of the one existence is used in its application only to the spiritual aspect of cosmogony by archaic esotericism. So when we talk about breath, we are talking about the most spiritual aspect of this principle. And then she says, otherwise, it is replaced by its equivalent in the material plane, motion. So that which on the spiritual, or that, let's say, that which here we know as motion, as something moving within space, on the spiritual planes is called the breath, or the great breath, which it is the essence of motion, and yet is not motion as we know it, because on the state of unity there is no single fragment that is moving. So again, Blavatsky said from the very beginning, whenever we want to try to picture what that state of absolute unity is, we will fail. However, trying to, making an effort to conceive, we may not get an idea of it because our mind, the images that our mind has is just created by a world where there is separation. So even though we cannot make an idea of this, meditating on these things can take us beyond the mental level, and we may sense how this is correct, how this exists or is. We may intuitively sense these realities, and by doing that we start awakening this intuition in ourselves. So then she says that this motion, which is an attribute of the one eternal element, or the element containing vehicle, normally we think of things. So when we talk about unity, we think that unity is a thing. Now, she calls it here like a vehicle or a container, the space that contains everything. Now, this space is not a thing, it's not an object. So if there is a subtle correction there that Blavatsky tries to make in the way she was putting it, which is again difficult. When we talk about the unity, we think an object out there that is the unity. Then when she changes to space, which is boundless, then it's more difficult to talk about the boundless space as an object. So she says this space is dimensionless in every sense. We already discussed that. Coexistence with which are endless duration, primordial and hence indestructible matter or substance, and motion, the absolute perpetual motion, which is the breath of the one element. This breath, as seen, can never cease, not even during the pralaic eternities. So even during pralaya, there is this breath. It is because of this breath that stays there that the universe changes from pralaya to manvantara. So the only thing that was there was the breath, which knows itself not. And here again is what we have discussed several times. The idea that consciousness as we know it is is a principle that is based on duality. So Blavatsky says, to know itself or oneself necessitates consciousness and perception, both of which are limited faculties in relation to any subject except Parabrahman. Parabrahm is the absolute, the Sanskrit name for the absolute. So this consciousness and perception are needed to cognize something. Hence, the eternal breath, which knows itself not. Infinity cannot comprehend finiteness. And thus, absolute consciousness and absolute motion is, to the limited senses of those who describe this indescribable, unconsciousness and immovableness. Remember, we said in the absolute both opposites are synthesized. But absolute consciousness contains the cognizer, so the subject, myself, the thing cognized, which is the object, whatever I'm perceiving, and the cognition or the perception, all three in itself and all three one. So this state of conscious non-consciousness that Blavatsky would refer to has the three elements in one. There is no separation between me perceiving something else and the perception that unites us, which may be conditioned or not. It's a state where the three are together. So as you see, these first two slokas are quite similar still to the first stanza. Now it is in the third sloka where more elements begin to come, still with this sense of a duality that is not yet. But now the third stanza talks about what is going to happen when the universe awakens. So the hour had not yet struck. The ray had not yet flashed into the germ. The Matri Padma, or Mother Lotus, had not yet swollen. And Blavatsky explains, the germ is the point in the mundane egg, represented by matter in its abstract sense. The idea of the mundane egg, you have in many mythologies that the universe began as an egg. And the idea of the mundane egg is a symbol for matter before it is differentiated. You know, an egg, you have in the yolk that to our eyes seems to be something, completely homogeneous. There is no separation there. But in the yolk, you have the germ for all the different, cells and organs and structures that will a chicken have, when adult. So everything is contained in the yolk. So the egg is sometimes used in mythologies to represent this germ, which is still homogeneous, but which will give the rise to the whole differentiation that makes up the cosmos, the universe. So many times this in symbology is represented by a circle with a point in the center. Now there are in the Secret Doctrine two circles with a point. The first circle with a point is the unmanifested logos. As we are going to see, is the center through which the ray comes and differentiates matter. And then there is the other circle with the point, which is the germ within the egg. This is more on the plane of manifestation. So Blavatsky sometimes would say the first circle is black and the dot in the center is white, because it is from where light comes. And the second circle is a white circle with a black dot in the center, because the white circle represents the already manifested, although still undifferentiated matter, and the dot in the center represents the germ, like the potentiality for everything that will be in the universe. So Blavatsky says, talking about this symbol, but the term point must not be understood as applying to any particular point in space. For a germ exists in the center of every atom, and these collectively form the germ. Or rather, as no atom can be made visible to our physical eye, the collectivity of these, if the term can be applied to something which is boundless and infinite, forms the noumenon, the cause, of eternal and indestructible matter. So this germ, when we see the symbol of the circle and the central point, we may think of the scientific idea of the Big Bang. The Secret Doctrine doesn't seem to support that idea. As we are going to see, the idea of expansion from a center is only true symbolically. It seems that because this pre-cosmic substance fills the whole universe, when this pre-cosmic substance is activated, it is activated in the whole universe at the same time, or in the whole solar system, if we are talking about the manifestation of a solar system, for example. This is more in tune with a different scientific theory that little by little is gaining strength, which they call it brains, like membranes. So they say the universe didn't really come out of a center, but it is rather there are like brains which are a different dimension of space, which when they touch, they are like bouncing each other by gravity. So these brains are dimensions of space. It's obviously difficult to conceive, but when they touch, the whole of the brain activates, manifests. And then that brain that was homogeneous, the matter there begins to coagulate into different systems. As they separate, then that diversification begins to lessen, and all this gradually becomes again homogeneous, and then gravity will bring them back and make them touch, and again another manifestation appears. So in this cyclic theory of the universe is far more in tune, or so it seems, with what the Secret Doctrine says about how the universe manifests. But we are going to talk about this a little more in the next stanza, that is when we will explore the manifestation of the universe. So in symbolic ways, we have that there is a ray which is latent during the pralaya, and then at some point the ray radiates from the womb of darkness, and that ray is what we can call the logos. Then that ray flashes out, fecundates the germ, which is this primordial matter, and that fecundation will give room to the creation of the cosmos or the world. All these symbols can be applied to different levels. So if we call it the mundane egg, maybe we are talking about how our earth begins. If we are talking about the cosmos, we could say this is a cosmic egg or a universal egg. So that is the idea with this symbol. And we will discuss this in the next stanza, as I said, because right now the ray has not flashed out. The ray is still in darkness. So the last part of the shloka said, the Matri Padma, the mother lotus, had not yet swollen. And then Blavatsky explains that one of the symbolical figures for the dual creative power in nature, and you see again there is the mention of duality, which she says on the material plane is matter and force. So one of the symbolical figure for the dual creative power in nature, matter and force on the material plane, is Padma, the lotus, the water lily of India. And the reason is because the lotus is the product of heat or fire, what comes from the sun, and water or vapor or ether, because you can interpret this in two ways. Heat or fire and water, because the lotus lives in water and obviously gets all the energy for photosynthesis and all this from the sun. So the lotus can be seen as the result of water and fire. But also on a more spiritual aspect, which is how Blavatsky is going to interpret this, you can think of fire as being the deity and water as being the substance which the deity uses. So she says fire standing in every philosophical and religious system as a representation of the spirit of the deity, the active male generative principle, and ether or the soul of matter, the light of the fire, standing for the passive female principle from which everything in this universe is emanated. So you have this basic duality between fire and water. Fire is the logos, water is the primordial substance, spirit and matter. So you see how this begins to talk about all these dualities which are going to be manifested in the near future. And she says also that the seeds of the lotus contain, even before they germinate, perfectly formed leaves in the germ of the lotus, the miniature shape of what one day, as perfect plants, they will become. Nature thus giving us a specimen of the preformation of its production. So you have there like a presentment, like a little blueprint of what that germ will become. And this is a good symbol for the universe too, because in the universal mind already is the blueprint of what the universe will be. So the manifestation and the appearance of time is simply the process of making concrete what is as a reality in the mind of the logos. So in a sense, we could say if you are a painter and you have a clear idea of what you want to paint with all its details, you have a vision, then you need time to portray that vision in the form of a painting. And you need time, and you start, with the background, and then you do this and you do that. All that is what we call evolution. Evolution is the painting of this idea that is in the mind of the logos. And the time, what we perceive as time, is simply this progressive process of materialization of that which is in the idea of the logos. So Blavatsky says this typifies the fact that the spiritual prototypes of all things exist in the immaterial world before those things become materialized on earth. This explains the sentence, "The mother had not yet swollen," the form being usually sacrificed to the inner or root idea in archaic symbology. She says it's not necessarily a very poetical way of putting it. The mother had not yet swollen, but she says this idea of swollen gives the impression of something that is contained that will come out. And we are going to see this expression again in the next stanza. Okay, so now the fourth sloka. it says, her heart, the heart of the mother lotus, had not yet opened for the one ray, which is the logos, to enter, thence to fall as 3 into 4 in the lap of Maya. Remember, Maya is illusion. So Blavatsky explains, the primordial substance, which is symbolized by the mother, had not yet passed out of its pre-cosmic latency into differentiated objectivity. So if we take the mother in the most abstract spiritual way, like this celestial virgin, this state of primordial matter which is not productive yet, which is not differentiated, that is the pre-cosmic substance, which is the stage in the process that we are at right now. We are still in the pre-cosmic states, and this pre-cosmic substance is still virgin, is still not ready to receive the ray of the logos, and therefore begin to differentiate. And then Blavatsky says, but as the hour strikes, as the pralaya finishes, and the substance becomes receptive of the phohatic impress. Phohat is this cosmic energy, so she's using it here as an adjective. So as this substance becomes receptive to the phohatic impress of the divine thought, which is the logos, or the male aspect of the anima mundi, of the soul, which is alaya. And don't worry about those technical terms if you are new to the Secret Doctrine, but you see clearly the idea is the logos, the ray is the active principle, the mother, the lotus, is the passive principle. When they unite, then the universe comes about or comes forth. So when the hour strikes, the heart of the mother opens. It differentiates, and the 3, father, mother, and son, are transformed into 4. So as we will see when we go into the process of manifestation, we already discussed a little about this, father and mother, the duality becomes a triplicity. So we have seen that far. Now this triplicity next becomes a four elements. This is what, for example, tetractys, the tetractys of Pythagoras, tetra means 4. So Pythagoras said that this tetractys was the perfect symbol for the manifested universe. And Blavatsky here says also the sacred 4 are the first 4 principles which set in motion the manifestation of the universe. So this is one of the ways to interpret the 3 falling into the 4. And what are these 4 principles? Well, she says the union of these 3 principles depends upon a 4th. The life which radiates from the summits of the unreachable to become a universally diffused essence on the manifested planes of existence. Mother, father, and son are a unity, and a quaternary, meaning 4, as a living manifestation. So in its still non-manifested aspect, father, mother, and son are a unity. When manifestation begins, the 3 of them acquire like a special quality, so they seem different, they differentiate, and then out of this a 4th element is produced, which is the manifested life that comes from these 3. So if we use a diagram, we can see how we have this triangle where mother, father, and son are still one. Up here is the non-manifested planes. Now when manifestation begins, there is a ray that comes out of it, which is the universal life. Now, within this field of manifestation, the universal life will start assuming all different forms. So these first four elements, Father, Mother, and Son, which are synthesized in the non-manifested planes, plus their manifestation as a unity, which is the universal life, these are the four sacred elements which are present in many mythologies. So even within the human being, you will have that this could be related to Atma, to Buddhi, and to Manas, for those who know about the septenary constitution, to higher Manas, and the ray would be the lower Manas, which is sent down to the material planes, and this lower Manas is a messenger from the higher triad in ourselves, for Father, Mother, and Son, for Atma, Buddhi, and Manas. So those are the four sacred elements that the stanza is talking about. Another way of interpreting the three fall into four is that as evolution proceeds, these three elements will manifest in four lower elements, like the higher triad and the lower quaternary. But that is later in evolution, since we are the very opening of it. The fourth element is the still universal, undifferentiated life. So remember that, however, we are not still at this point. This is all what is going to happen. And then again the stanza says, the seven sons were not yet born from the web of light. Darkness alone was Father, Mother, Swabhabat, and Swabhabat was in darkness. So the idea, she says, the secret doctrine in the stanzas given here occupies itself chiefly, if not entirely, with our solar system, and especially with our planetary chain. We already discussed that. The seven sons, therefore, are the creators of the planetary chain. So what the stanzas give, all these symbols and stages and images, they can be applied to any system. Blavatsky says the formation of the cosmos follows the same stages as the formation of a mosquito. Within the mosquito, you have something that represents the first logos, the beginning of differentiation. You have something that represents the matter, the matter that swellens and begins to reproduce and differentiate. And you have, she says, if you really understand all this, you can describe the beginning of a mosquito or the beginning of the universe with the same symbols. This is the advantage that symbolic language has over scientific language. Scientific language can be applied only to that particular phenomena for which that very specific language was created. Symbols, because according to the esoteric philosophy, the whole universe follows the same laws on all the planes, then symbols can explain the basic structure of any process. So in this case, the seven sons, just as the seven ahis are the highest beings that appear in the universe, the seven sons are a reflection of these ahis, and is the reflection of these Elohim that create the planetary chain of which Earth is part. And then she talks about Swabhabat. This comes from the Sanskrit word Swabhava, which means the true nature. So Swabhabat, the plastic essence that fills the universe, is the root of all things. So this Swabhabat is this pre-cosmic matter that we were talking about, although now in a slightly more concrete state, let's say. Mula Prakriti, which we called the root nature, the pre-cosmic substance or root substance, is absolutely undifferentiated. Swabhavat now, even though it's not undifferentiated, there is something already. It is not differentiated. I mean, or you know, it is still homogeneous. There is still something that is going on in Swabhavat. Both polarities are present, not as a unity, not as a duality, but as something in between. So Blavatsky says, Swabhavat, the plastic essence that fills the universe, is the root of all things. Swabhavat is, so to say, the Buddhistic concrete aspect of the abstraction called in Hindu philosophy Mula Prakriti. So Swabhavat, according to her, was used by one school of Buddhism, and in Mula Prakriti is in Hinduism, is used in Hinduism. So she says it is the body of the soul. So if we talk about the principles, the basic principles that we have seen so far, we have Parabrahman, which is the absolute, would be like the spirit. Then we have Mula Prakriti, which is the root substance, like the soul. It is a little more concrete. It's not the absolute. It's a more concrete aspect of the absolute, but it's still unity and differentiated. And then we have Swabhavat, that is a more concrete aspect of Mula Prakriti. So Mula Prakriti is in the first stanza, Swabhavat is in the second stanza. And if it is called the Father-Mother, because, as I mentioned, we start talking about this duality which is still one. We start talking about these two things that will become opposites in manifestation. So you see father dash mother, and later in the third stanza, Swabhavat is called the two substances made in one. So maybe we could bring the idea of the atom. The atom, you have a neutral atom, you have positive and negative charges that are both there, but because they are in equilibrium, the atom is neutral. Now, as soon as you separate them, you get electricity and you get the ions and you get all kind of energy and manifestation. So Mula Prakriti would be an atom in which there is no yet differentiation between the protons and the neutrons and the electrons. Then Swabhavat would be the atom as we know it, in which these two are still part of a unity, but they can be separated. And then the manifestation of Swabhavat, the cosmic matter manifested, would be when we separate those two polarities. So Swabhavat is a polarization within the unity. And then the shloka says, these two are the germ, father and mother are the germ, and the germ is one. So you see, it's a polarization, but we still have a unity. The universe was still concealed in the divine thought and the divine bosom. So again, the divine thought is the logos, is the father, the divine bosom is the mother, is the substance. So Blavatsky explains, the universe, not only past, present, and future, which is a human and finite idea expressed by finite thought, but in its totality, the Sat, which means truth or the absolute being, Blavatsky says it is an untranslatable term, the absolute being, with the past, present, and future crystallized in an eternal present, the eternal now, is that thought itself reflected in a secondary or manifest cause. So the universe, let us leave aside the parentheses, the universe is the thought, the divine thought itself, but reflected in a secondary or manifest cause. So as divine thought, the universe as just an idea is in the mind of the unmanifested logos, the first logos. And then the universe as manifestation is that idea reflected on the manifested cause, which is the third logos. And the second logos is the swabhavat, which is in between the first and the third. Blavatsky sometimes would skip the second logos and would refer just to the unmanifested and the manifested. But when referring to the second logos, she would say it is semi-manifested. It shares qualities both with the unmanifested and the manifested, and therefore it is like a bridge between the two. So the second stanza, if we bring it to the level of the three logoi, the second stanza would have to do with the second logos. And then she says, but remember that when we talk about the divine thought, we are not implying the idea of a divine thinker. We have the tendency to think of this as being, conditioned entities. As we saw, the logos is that intelligence that is in the fabric of the universe. And then that intelligence will manifest through any entity that appears in the universe in a more or less perfect way. When that intelligence that is in the fabric of the cosmos manifests through the Dhyani Buddhas, the highest beings, then you have this universal mind. When it manifests through human beings or animals or other kingdoms of nature, you have the conditioned intelligence that we have. But the essence of the intelligence in us, in animals, in the highest angels is exactly the same. It's this cosmic ideation, this logos. So she says that at the beginning of cosmic evolution, the universe or the sun is still lying concealed in the divine thought, which had not yet penetrated into the divine bosom. So again, she's going back to say, but remember that not yet. So if we see this in a diagram, we have the divine thought, which is in the eternal now, is beyond time. This is where the archetypes of Plato are. And then you have the divine bosom, which is this primordial matter. When the divine thought activates and it impresses the divine bosom, this happens through the seven suns. The seven celestial beings are the ones that bring that divine thought into manifestation by impressing those ideas in the divine bosom. And then you have the manifested universe. So this is what the second stanza describes. As you see, as we have discussed, it's the preparation for what we are going to see in our next class, which is the moment where the universe awakes. And you will see how the language of the stanzas change, and the images that they use are very different. So I hope to see you in our next class.